You're listening to the audiobook version of You'll Just Have to Taste Me When He's Kissing You by Love Kurt on Tumblr, AO3, Wattpad, etc. Major warning for this fic. Sexual content. Lots of it. Please be cautious before proceeding. Don't like? Don't listen. And unless you want to be extremely confused, you should listen to This Is Me Trying first. Wyatt Bowman was a simple man. He loved three things above all else: Iron Maiden, a fat joint, and his best friend, Mike Wheeler. Not to say that he was in love with Mike per se. No, this love was purely platonic. Well, platonic with the side of sex, if they were in the mood. And Mike was almost always in the mood, so Wyatt wasn't complaining. It didn't matter that Mike's subtle smiles when he cracked a joke made Wyatt's heart flutter. It didn't matter that when Mike exhaled smoke, Wyatt wanted to snatch it directly from his lips. It didn't matter that his entire family was pushing him to officially ask Mike out. His younger sisters were basically in a long-distance relationship with Mike all the way from New Jersey with how much they heard about him. To them, he was a tall, deliciously troubled soul with killer bone structure. But it wasn't like that. They were friends with benefits, and Wyatt liked it that way. He just dyed his hair bright red when he first met Mike. He'd taken a trip to the library to pick up a new summer read, a title he'd had an eye on for quite some time but never got around to renting out, as school practically sucked his love for reading out of him. He turned the corner of the aisle and saw a skinny guy pulling that exact book off the bookshelf. The first thing he noticed about the guy was that he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, if not weeks. The second thing he noticed was that this guy was definitely a nerd, judging upon the pile of other fantasy and mythological novels piled high on the surface of the table. And the third thing he noticed was that this guy was cute. Very cute. So Wyatt decided to chat him up, test the waters. Never thought I'd see the day that book would leave the shelf. You must have had to brush off like 100 years worth of dust just to get to the cover. The cute guy twisted around, raising his eyebrows when they came face to face. A light smirk graced his lips as he very obviously looked Wyatt up and down. "You're definitely right about that," he said, and put the book down on the growing pile. The two young men watched the book sway from side to side, battling gravity's pull. "So you're into mythology?" Wyatt asked, trying to keep the conversation going. The guy's eyes met his own with an intensity that made his heart beat 10 times faster inside of his chest. "Yeah, I'm a creative writing major, and I'm trying to expand my horizons a little," the guy replied, sitting down at the table. "Like, not to discount the genius of Tolkien, because he literally founded my childhood, but sometimes it's good to go back to the basics and draw inspiration from there." So he was a writer. Wyatt didn't think this guy could get any more attractive. He played it cool, shrugging as he sat across the table from the writer. "Nothing wrong with that. I think it's really smart, actually, or else stories end up getting repetitive and dull." "Exactly!" the guy exclaimed, pointing his index fingers at Wyatt as if he'd struck a gold mine. "Are you into writing as well?" "Not particularly, not even for school." Wyatt wanted to say yes, but something told him that he'd be better off just telling the truth. "No," he replied. "I'm just into guys who write about mythology." The guy's jaw dropped. "Oh, wow, okay," he stuttered, and his eyes darted around wildly as he likely tried to process the idea of a guy hitting on him. That must not have happened often. How could it not? He blinked a few times before saying, "I'm Mike Wheeler." "Wyatt Bowman." Mike cleared his throat. "Are you free in an hour, Wyatt?" "Yeah, why?" Wyatt raised an eyebrow, and Mike forced out a nervous laugh, tapping the eraser of his pencil against his notebook. If Wyatt could also feel the floor shaking from the bouncing of Mike's knee, he didn't mention it. "I just gotta take some notes from here. Then I was thinking we could hang out or something?" Mike glanced up at Wyatt, and those eyes. Those eyes. That was what confirmed it for Wyatt. Mike was into this too. "Or something?" Wyatt repeated, and he felt himself blushing. How embarrassing. Mike nodded. "Cool," Wyatt said. "That sounds like a good plan." He stood up then, smiling at Mike as he headed towards the exit. When Mike proposed the idea of being friends with benefits, Wyatt was secretly opposed. They'd already slept together twice, so it seemed kind of wrong to simplify what they had down to a label. But it was what Mike wanted, and Wyatt wanted Mike, so he'd take what he was given. They'd hang out, fuck, play video games, fuck, smoke weed, fuck, go to parties, and fuck. Wyatt understood that Mike wasn't into commitment. It was a huge responsibility, and it wasn't a decision one could make lightly. But if Mike were to suddenly turn around and ask Wyatt if he wanted to date, for real, he would say yes without hesitation. The third time they slept together, Mike had woken up in the middle of the night, screaming about a person named Will. He'd broken down in Wyatt's arms, sobbing incoherently about how he'd ruined everything. The next day, Wyatt decided to bite the bullet and ask about who the hell this Will character was. And the best way to do that was with weed. Mike likely wouldn't open up without a foreign substance in his system. "Hey, Mike," he said. "Good start." "Yeah, Wyatt?" "Tell me about Will." Mike turned away from his friend and hacked out the smoke that had accumulated in his lungs. That definitely caught him off guard. "Jesus, way to preface," Mike chuckled with a roll of his eyes. He turned to Wyatt, who was giving him a knowing look. "Last night you had a nightmare and started screaming his name. Look, I don't want to press you. I just want you to know that I'm here if you want to talk about it." Mike took a few seconds to contemplate his answer. "Okay, I'll talk," Mike relented, crossing his arms and leaning back onto the pillows on Wyatt's bed. "But did you have to name-bomb me like that? You were the one that name-bombed me first. I have no idea who Will is. Besides, would you have agreed to talk about him if I brought him up any other way?" "Probably not." "Thought so. So, tell me." Mike began, but it looked like his thoughts were lodged in his throat, like he had no idea where to begin. "He's just..." "Okay, let's start easy. How did you meet?" Mike took a deep breath in and proceeded to talk for nearly 3 hours without stopping. They went through 2 more joints. From what Wyatt could gather, Will was Mike's first friend. His first best friend. His first love. Will was someone who had a talent for art, specifically the art that Mike had tacked to his bedroom ceiling. Will was someone who had gone through something crazy involving monsters and the government. Mike didn't go into much detail at all with that one, citing NDAs as the reason why he couldn't, with Mike watching it all go down from the front row. Will was someone who led Mike on for years, which made the letdown even harsher. Will was someone Mike wrote 26 secret and incredibly detailed love letters to, and found them while snooping in Mike's room. Will was someone who shattered Mike's heart and left him to pick up the pieces all on his own. And yet, Mike still loved Will. Wyatt didn't understand why. He was, in Wyatt's eyes, the Willin, if you will. God damn it. "I'm sorry," Wyatt said, and he meant it. Will had sent Mike to hell and back, and wasn't even there to witness the aftershocks of what he did to Mike. "For what?" Mike asked, slightly incredulous. His voice was hoarse from all the talking, which Wyatt would have found hilarious if not for the current subject matter. "You have nothing to be sorry for." "No, I know. I'm just sorry that you lost him. It sounds like you two would have been perfect together." "Yeah, well," Mike shrugged, picking at his nails. "We aren't together. Or perfect. We were doomed from the start." Wyatt reached his hand out to stop Mike from tearing his fingertips to shreds, interlocking their fingers. Mike smiled sweetly at him. "You're gonna be okay," Wyatt told him. "It might take a while, but you're gonna be okay." Mike's eyes danced up and down between Wyatt's eyes and lips as he took one last hit of the joint. He leaned in just enough so their breath intermingled as he exhaled. Wyatt leaned in too, watching the smoke dancing in the small space between them. "Want to make out?" "I don't think you even have to ask anymore." No time was wasted between when Mike got his last words out and when Wyatt connected their lips. Things got heated quickly, their tongues brushing together with intention. Wyatt's hands ran up Mike's sides and pushed under his shirt, signaling Mike to take it off. He did, and Wyatt's lips were on Mike's collarbone in 5 seconds flat. Mike moaned into Wyatt's neck, moving so he was straddling his waist. He lowered himself down so their hips were flush, and Wyatt felt heat rushing down to where they connected. He groaned at the contact, cutting to the chase as he reached into Mike's sweatpants and started pumping up and down slowly. Mike bit his lip, clearly craving more friction. Mike went to reciprocate Wyatt's advances, but Wyatt stopped him. He only wanted Mike to feel this. He wanted Mike to feel wanted. He wanted Mike to feel appreciated. He wanted Mike to feel loved. "Tell me, Mike," Wyatt said, speeding up and slowing down his movements every few pumps and making Mike shudder. "Did Will ever touch you like this?" "Once. It was a mistake, though." Well then. Wyatt wasn't expecting that answer, but whatever. He could do better than Will ever had. But did you like it? He asked. Yes, Mike shivered, and Wyatt huffed a laugh against his neck. He loved that even though they were talking about Will, he was the one making Mike react this way. Fuck yes. I never wanted him to stop. Wyatt stopped immediately, and Mike whined at the loss of stimulation. Never wanted him to stop what? He asked, drinking in the sight of the man perched in his lap. Mike's eyes were the size of the moon, his cheeks were a dusty pink, and his lips were parted only slightly. He was gorgeous like this. Mike whined again, rubbing against Wyatt's open palm, but he didn't budge. Not until Mike gave him an answer to his question. Touching me, Mike breathed. Wyatt grinned, gripping Mike by his thighs and rolling to the side so Mike was under him. He kissed down Mike's chest, stomach, and took the final liberties of removing Mike's sweatpants and boxers before taking him in his mouth. The sex with Mike was fantastic. They'd touch, they'd kiss, they'd pull sounds out of each other that they didn't know existed. They'd make each other feel. It was almost enough to make Wyatt forget about the feelings he had for Mike. Where he couldn't provide love, he provided comfort, affection, and distraction. And as good as it felt to be that for Mike, it was also kind of depressing merely serving as a band-aid. Because a band-aid can only stay on for so long before the wound gets infected and you have to rip it off. When Mike found other band-aids in the forms of Wes Butler, Walker Brooks, and Warren Blakely, Wyatt couldn't help but feel superior. Which would sound absolutely unhinged if he were to ever say it out loud. But there was something very telling about how every time Mike fucked a new WB, Wyatt was the first one to hear about it and the first one to make Mike come afterwards. It was almost like he had the power to make up for what all the other WBs couldn't do. At least he used to be able to. Now he was lucky to hear from Mike at all. Mike had a habit of dropping off the face of the earth when things got especially difficult. Mike had been missing for the past few days, and Wyatt was starting to worry. Wyatt was used to Mike's disappearances, plus he usually alerted him beforehand. He never really faulted Mike for it. He'd been through a lot, and considering the most recent development that Mike had just failed out of college, he would understand if Mike didn't want to talk about it. But this time around, Mike was gone without a trace. No warning, no nothing, just complete and utter silence. He'd dropped by Mike's apartment, but no one was there. He asked around campus. No one knew of his whereabouts. He could only assume the worst at this point. Wyatt was no stranger to Mike's alcoholic tendencies. He noticed when Mike downed 5 too many shots, or when Mike went through a 24-ounce bottle of hard liquor in just a few days. He could tell the difference between Mike being drunk or hungover when he came to class. He was never sober in class. Come to think of it, Wyatt hadn't seen Mike completely sober since the day they met in the library. And even then, was he sober? The thought of knowing Mike, yet not knowing Mike at all, made Wyatt feel, to put it lightly, uneasy. Mike was in trouble, and even he knew it. Mike would take a swig from his flask and mutter, "I should stop," under his breath. He'd show up at Mike's place and see all the half-empty bottles littering nearly all the surfaces in the apartment. He had to pry the alcohol out of Mike's hands for weeks after he'd been assaulted at that party. He'd even had to get the other guy, Warren Blakely, involved when Mike couldn't get off the living room floor. Wyatt remembered that night very vividly, mostly because of the fact that Mike was reveling in the glory of being manhandled by 2 out of 3 of my WBs. There were actually 4 WBs, 5 counting Will Byers, but Mike had liked that he made a rhyme. There were a few nights when Wyatt's mind would wander to the dreaded possibility of Mike choking on his own vomit, or crashing his car, or choking on his own vomit while crashing his car. He feared the day he'd get the call that Mike was dead, and he had no doubt that he'd end up taking at least some of the blame. The rest would ultimately fall on Will, and Wyatt would make sure he'd suffer. The front door to Wyatt's apartment slammed shut, startling him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see his roommate, Richard On, placing his keys on the hook next to the door. "Any word on Mike?" Richard asked, making his way over to Wyatt, who sat on the living room couch with a cup of coffee in his left hand and Watchers by Dean Koontz in his left. "Nope," Wyatt sighed, taking another sip of coffee. He'd concluded earlier that day that if he didn't hear from Mike tonight, then he'd get authorities involved. The last thing he wanted to do was get Mike into trouble for underage drinking, but since the future hung between Mike being safe and Mike being dead, he'd opt for Mike's safety. I hope for your sanity that he calls tonight, Richard told him, placing a supportive hand on Wyatt's shoulder. I know he means a lot to you. Yeah, man, thank you, Wyatt said, glancing back at his book as Richard headed to his room. So the dog just brought Travis a beer. What the fuck? Travis thinks it's a trick taught to the dog by its previous owner. I mean, it's a horror novel. The phone rang. The screen lit bright green, and Wyatt gulped. He checked his watch. 2:45. It had to be Mike. It had to be. Wyatt stood up and totally didn't run to the phone, reading the area code on the screen. 312. What was the area code for 312? There was only one way to find out. Wyatt picked up the receiver, holding it up to his ear. Hello? Wyatt, it's Mike, he heard him say, and relief rushed through his body. But only for a second, because why was Mike whispering? Mike, you fucker, I was worried you died. Mike laughed quietly. Damn him. This was not funny. Almost did, but didn't. So, how is everything? What's up? Wyatt scoffed cynically. What's up? What's fucking up? He made his way back to the couch, picking up his mug. Mike, you just admitted to almost dying. What the hell are you? Remember Will? Unfortunately. Yeah, I remember him. Another sip. So I may be at his house. Wyatt almost spit out his coffee. He coughed, taking a moment to compose himself. I thought he wasn't talking to you. That asshole cut you off. He did. He wasn't. But anyway, I was at a party last night and was getting a blowjob from this guy. Jesus, Mike, what? Wyatt yelped, putting his coffee back down on the table. He could not be trusted with it right now. You were with another guy last night? His name was Carter, so no new additions to the WBs, I'm afraid. Wyatt's eyebrows furrowed, and he leaned back onto the couch cushions. He couldn't be talking about Carter as in Carter Wilson Bailey? About my height, kinda muscular with brown hair and green eyes? How do you... He was one of my freshman year hookups. You've gotta be kidding. Mike let out another quiet laugh, and Wyatt refrained from rolling his eyes. So he is a WB after all. Okay. Wyatt had also slept with Carter, but Mike was more concerned about Carter being a WB. Made total sense. Yup. So, Mike trailed off. Will, Wyatt said, rather begrudgingly. Right, yeah, so I might have moaned Will's name while Carter was blowing me. Mike. Michael. Really? Yeah, not my best moment. So what happened? Wyatt pressed, not sure if he really wanted to hear what Mike had to say next. He obviously left the room, and I was just so ashamed of myself and who I've become. So I left the party and drove to Chicago, to Will's house. That explains the area code, Wyatt thought aloud. Yeah, Mike said. The almost dying thing happened while I was blasting music and nearly collided head-on with the tractor-trailer. It was a really close call, but I'm good. All Wyatt was capable of replying with was, wow. Yeah, crazy, right? Insane. So what happened after that? I just spent the rest of the drive thinking over what I was gonna say. I got to Will's school, and get this, he painted a fucking huge portrait of me, like a 3x4 foot oil on canvas. I was in shock. And I also met one of his teachers, I think. She was weird and southern and didn't tell me that she knew who I was not until I was leaving. And even then, she was really vague about it. But I met two of his friends and they're lesbians. I'm not really sure why that's important, but that was pretty neat, meeting other gay people who are so open about who they are. Anyway, they gave me Will's address, and now I'm here. How did the conversation go down? Wyatt felt like he was just asking questions now for the sake of hearing Mike's voice. Wyatt had never heard him talk like this. So fast in a way that he could hear Mike smile over the phone. It was so full of joy. Joy that Wyatt knew only Will could bring out of him. So I apologized for everything, and he did too. And it turns out that the almost kiss, letters, and fight sequence was a massive miscommunication between us. He was in love with me for years, and thought I was just messing with him when he found the letters. But once I told him I wasn't messing with him, that I've loved him since the dawn of fucking time, he told me he still loves me. And we're together. For real. You're abandoning me? Wyatt wanted to ask. His head was spinning. At his house, at the foot of his bed, watching him sleep right now because I'm too goddamn happy to close my eyes. So you had sex, so much of it, like so much that my ass hurts, you know? Yeah, I know. I'm so fucking happy, Wyatt. You have no idea how much this means to me. Yes, he did. He knew how much it meant to Mike. He just didn't expect for Mike's happiness to hurt him so much. Yeah, I'm happy for you, Mike. Thanks, dude. Dude. So what are you gonna... We're going to my family's house for Christmas, and then we're spending New Year's with Will's family. For Christ's sake, was Mike ever going to let Wyatt finish a fucking sentence? I was talking about your living situation. Are you doing long distance? Well, I think our next logical step after being so far apart for so long is moving in together? I don't know. Wyatt let out a shaky breath. Well, if that happens, is Will coming here or are you going there? I actually haven't thought that far ahead. Obviously. I guess I'll base it upon how well or badly shit goes when I tell my parents that I'm dating my best friend. I thought I was your best friend. Wyatt knew he sounded childish, like he was grasping at air, but he was desperate. What the hell was he going to do now? Of course you're my best friend, Wyatt. Why do you think you were the first person I called? I love you, man. This conversation just kept getting worse and worse. Love you too, man. I just meant that Will and I grew up together and we were best friends as kids. But now he's my boyfriend, so it's different. Yeah, he could say that again. Boyfriend. Yeah, it's so weird to say, right? Mm-hmm. God, I could literally cry right now. He's the love of my life. Right. I'm glad you found each other again, Wyatt heard himself say, but he didn't believe it. You are? Of course, Mike, he said, pinching the bridge of his nose to stop the tears welling in the corners of his eyes. You have my blessing. I'm so glad. Yeah. Shit, it's like 3 a.m. Mike acknowledged the time, and Wyatt chuckled sadly. You have work in the morning, right? Yeah, Wyatt nodded. I should go. Okay, thanks for listening, Wyatt, and for being such a good friend. That's what I'm here for, he said, and that was the truth. Bye, Mike. Bye. So, Wyatt had lost Mike. But he wasn't going to cry. At least not tonight. Because for now, despite feeling like his whole world had just crumbled, Wyatt knew that he and Mike were still friends, and would stay friends for the rest of their lives. And that made him smile. You've been listening to the audiobook version of You'll Just Have to Taste Me When He's Kissing You by Love Kurt on Tumblr, AO3, Wattpad, etc. Subscribe if you want to stay tuned for any future uploads.